Humans of Earth, welcome to Will AI Snap That. I am Michael Rollins, and I am joined as always by my co-host Thanos, he of the Snapdom. And we are here today to help you as you face the impending robotic overlord taking your job. Thanos, how are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great. I'm coming to you through Starlink today.
Are
So
you?
if you see if you say anything and piss off Elon, my connection is going to drop off, and
Okay, we won't do that. So
my
today, and we need to make a point of this. Today, we're going to do a little bit of normal news at the beginning, AI news, and then at the end, towards the latter half of the show, we are going to talk about building expert AI agents, what they are, what tools are involved, what can you get off the shelf, what do you need or what do you need to build yourself, things like that. So it's a really, really exciting thing to build. So
I
Thanos,
heard a
you
really good definition of agents,
tell me.
and it said it was good because it was short, and it said agents are models using tools in a loop. And I was like,
Yep,
yeah, that's actually really good.
yep, that is 100% what agents are. So
Models using tools in a loop. Done.
models using tools in a loop.
Speaking of
All right.
models, did you see that Claude actually releases all their prompts in there?
So do they actually release them or was
Yeah,
it
you
leaked?
can go on their website and actually read their prompts,
Oh,
which
that's
was fascinating.
exciting. So tell me a little bit about them. What are they like? What are they like and things like that?
Yeah, I went and read the Claude prompt, and there was a few things that were fascinating about it. I mean, it's just normal stuff you expect, right? You're going to be helpful for this, not going to be helpful with that. Don't give them like how to make nuclear biological weapons. Don't let kids harm themselves. That's fairly straightforward. But a few things jumped out to me. One of them said, if the user says, asks you for something you cannot do, just
Hmm.
decline it without saying why. Because if you start with saying why, you sound preachy. I thought that was pretty funny. And it's like, okay, you could say don't tell them why because you become preachy. Now leads you to believe, is the prompt talking to the LLM or is the prompt talking to the reader of the prompt?
Interesting. And
So I thought
honestly,
that was kind of cute.
let's be honest. That's probably not bad advice in general. Because
Don't
like,
be preachy.
yeah, don't be preachy. And I mean, also sometimes explaining your motivations, while a lot of times it's helpful, occasionally it makes the other person feel that they are have moral deficiency in your eyes, that you have judged them
That's
and
a
they have
great
found
answer, Michael.
lacking. Thank you. Thank you. So, all right. So that's really interesting. Any other cool stuff in the
That was the
prompts?
one fun of them. The other one, I'm going to read you this bit because it said Claude assumes the human is asking for something legal and legitimate if their message is ambiguous and could have a legal and legitimate interpretation. So it's like, try to be helpful and just err on the side of this is probably fine if it's that. But just scrolling a little bit further down, and this was actually hilarious. Let me see if I find this. Then it says, if a person seems to have questionable intentions, especially towards vulnerable groups and minors, the elderly, or those with disabilities, Claude
Mhm.
does not interpret them charitably and declines to help as succinctly as possible without speculating about more legitimate goals they might provide or providing alternative suggestions. It's like, but maybe not. So I wonder if that's confusing the model or what the heck, Claude?
Well, that's intriguing.
What do you make of that?
I mean, it feels like it starts with the assumption of good faith. And until
And then it
you,
ends with, but not really.
yeah, but I mean, listen, you and I both know that these LLMs, like everything's non-deterministic, and you need sometimes to give it enough leeway that it can make a decision without being explicitly prompted. And so the idea that start with good faith, but the minute you think they're not acting in good faith, like hit the eject button.
Eject.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So the whole thing is filled in with general information
Hmm.
about how to respond and how to tailor responses. And then it goes to the end, and the last two paragraphs of
Hmm.
election info. There was a U.S. presidential election in November 2024. Donald Trump won it over Kamala Harris. If asked about the election or the U.S. election, Claude can tell the person the following info, and it just gives like some couple of fairly brief facts. And it's like, how does this fit in? You don't talk anything about all the other news, but for the election, we're going to put like a little special thing to make sure you don't hallucinate.
Obviously, that's liberal bias.
Clearly, it was the
And here's the
NPR
thing,
people that are behind this.
and unfortunately, we live in a world right at this moment in the US where my thought was they've now made themselves a target. And it's
They
like
being,
Anthropic.
oh, I see.
The fact that
Why?
this is out there, it's on the internet, and anybody from any political party can go read it, means, and good on them for being so wildly open about what's in the prompt. Are they I think they're the only company that must do that.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen this from anywhere else. But why do you think this is making them a target? I mean, this is basically repeating like some very basic facts.
Oh, my friend, have you not realized that there are a lot of people that don't believe those are very, very basic facts? There's
Yeah,
no other
but
way to
like, I
say
mean, those
this.
people are gonna, take their weapons into pizzerias no matter what. So if, no matter what you do, they just want to stay on their good side
Yes, but
or
regardless of
away
what you
from the
think
enemies,
about
the
the
better.
the current administration, they do seem to be a bit capricious, and they seem to have gotten rid of a few norms that mean they would never have targeted a company for something like that. And so it's I appreciate that. And also I'm like, if I see legislation or some kind of federal investigation into Anthropic, I know why. I know why.
Because we
So
put a paragraph that says you guys won. But
yeah.
yeah,
So, moving on from this quickly becoming political topic, there is a company called, let's see, what's it called? Hang on. Base 44. Have you heard about this company?
no.
So, Base 44 is an Israeli company that was recently bought by Wix. And it is the first, they were bought for 80 million, or roughly 80 million. They had less than 10 employees. There was a single founder company, and they were bought like 8 months after their inception. And what they basically were was something like a Lovable or Replete, where you could vibe code an app and get it into some kind of production state and then deploy it. And very odd, Wix, which is also an Israeli company, decided that they were going to buy them and add them to their current product offering. So this is the first single founder exit that I've heard of where the basis of the entire technology was not just vibe coding, but built with vibe coding. So it's a really the dude that was the founder what had is he's Israeli citizen, and he had been part of the IDF, in Gaza. Once again, let's not get political, but this is just the fact. And he had some kind of, after he was done with his service, he rested for a little while. While he was resting, he built this company, sold it for 80 million, like less than a year later. And, you know, less than 10 people, I'm fairly certain he is going to, reward his employees grandly. But that's a wild outcome. Wild outcome. Not a
Yeah,
billion.
I'm curious. There's a nice little meta level there that you vibe coded a tool that helps people vibe code. And
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
feeling how those are going to end eventually, but
Yeah, that is the thing is you and I, so our definition of vibe coding is basic. Well, my definition of vibe coding at this point, and I think you agree, is YOLO, right?
well, that is the only definition of vibe coding because if you're looking at the code, it ceases to be vibe coding. I think that's the
Right. Yeah.
original
It's like,
intent
yeah,
of
just roll with it, yo. And so the idea that you would do that, release it to production, there's so many things that can go wrong, right?
yeah. I have a feeling that they probably didn't vibe code the whole thing because you
Probably, yeah,
cannot get very far. Like about a day into vibe coding, like a few hours or maybe even that, usually
yeah,
it's
and
pretty bad.
I haven't like dug deep into this guy's background. I don't know if he has any kind of technical experience or anything like that. And it is very likely that with 10 employees, some of them were able to actually code. The gentleman's name is Avishai Abrahami. I've butchered that wildly.
I'm
And
sure you
so,
nailed it correctly.
yeah, it's, It's, I don't know, it's just a really interesting moment where all of a sudden, first off, the bias against single founders is exceptional. I don't know if you've ever the a friend of mine, well, Sean, friend of the podcast. His entire he's their venture. They help startups do things, and two of our other guests are individual founders that New Horizons has come in and they help them as to kind of round out to avoid that bias. But it is really cool and very heartening to see a single founder exit to this level. Like, that's wild. And
Yeah,
personally, I would be okay with being a single founder that exits for 10 million. And so to get an 8x on that, it's just like, let's go,
but
dude.
5 is too little. Eh.
No, no. I mean, honestly, I'm okay with once you hit million, I'm in.
Yeah.
I am
Well,
in.
if you vibe coded in one afternoon, is 100,000 okay?
Yes. Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Right.
What's the hourly rate?
Yeah.
Assuming 10 hours of work, right?
Yeah.
It's $10,000 an hour. I'm good. Let's sell this thing. So that's pretty funny.
Good times with AI tools, man.
Yeah. In that note, let's actually move over to the main topic for today, which is expert AI systems, expert AI agents.
Models using tools in a loop.
Right. So that's
Now,
the
now
technical.
define the expert part there.
Well, okay. So the basic definition of agent, like you said, is models using tools in a loop.
Someone else made that one up. I'm not claiming credit for
No,
that, by the
no,
way.
yeah, I was just saying that you read that, right? And so an agent in general is something that typically has an LLM at the center. It can use tools and it goes and does things on your behalf. If you are using Claude Code, if you were using Cursor, if you were using Rue, all of the current coding tools are agents. There is some kind of working memory. They are able to go do things on your behalf, whether those things are use the command line or whatever.
Do
And
we have to have these things go like a little more autonomously than Claude Code goes to call them an agent, or do we still count them as an agent if I have to approve every step of the way?
no, because you can actually set Claude Code and all these other agents into YOLO mode. There is a like, you don't have to review every step. The only time, like, you can set Claude Code to just go bonkers, right? The only
Well,
time
yeah,
it
but we all
will.
know how that ends, right? So I think in my
Well,
mind,
but
if there's going to be a loop that does it without me looking at it, then there better be something else in there to make that useful. Because if I go after an hour and find out a mess, like that didn't help me. I just gonna have to throw it
okay.
away. And
And that's where this expert portion comes in, because you and I both know, and a lot of people know, that LLMs, especially the big frontier models, are general use, wide ranging, and you can get just about any type of answer, truthful or not truthful, out of them. And so an expert agent is actually things that, similar to what you and I have been building into our development environments, and I don't think we even realized it. An expert agent is something that not only brings an agent, this loop with tool use, to the table, but it also brings domain specific knowledge. And on top of that, it can and probably should bring some working memory to the table as well. So what does that look like in general? Oftentimes, if you want to add in domain specific knowledge, you can include a RAG database. That RAG database is filled with a set of documents that are specific to domains, and they inform the LLM when it is thinking, making choices, telling you stuff, right? And as we've talked about in the past, the usefulness of RAG databases is that you don't have to blow the context up in order to put domain specific knowledge in. You're not packing the prompt at the beginning of the session. Instead, the agent should know that it has this store off onto the side, and that store will provide it information that is specific to the tasks at hand.
And that would be similar to like the MCP interface, right? You have access to a blah,
Yeah.
use it here. These are the interfaces to use this RAG database.
Yes.
It knows about X.
And to that point, what's interesting is that MCP at this point is really just it's a pipe, it's a tool, right? A RAG database doesn't have to have an MCP server in front of it, but it tends to get much easier to use if that MCP server is in front of it.
Well, the model has to have some generic instructions of how to interface with tools. So it has to
Well,
understand what a tool is and how to structure a request so that the
right.
tool will accept it, do it, and then parse whatever
And
comes back.
and the thing is that under normal execution, so if you put MCP servers in Claude, like desktop or code, whatever, under normal execution, what it will do is it attempts to validate that the MCP servers are there. Once it knows that the MCP servers are there, it will query the MCP servers about what can you do. And at that point, it now has a list of tools that it can call via the MCP server. So MCP servers are really they're exposing to the LLM the tools that it can use, but a lot of times it's basically the same. It's like a wrapper on an API. Not always, but I mean it's effectively a different type of API ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, it's a generic way to take multiple APIs and then have to explain to the LLM how to work
Right.
with each of them. They're kind of
Yes.
like explain how to work with the MCP
Mhm.
idea, and then it knows how to work
Right.
with every API that the MCP can explain because you delegate.
And without
Uh,
MCP, you would have to include in the prompt that the RAG database is there and that it should use the RAG database and that it should do this and that, right? It becomes part of the prompt for the actual spin up of the LLM that there is a RAG database and you need to use it. And oftentimes you still need to kind of tell the LLM in the prompt, it's like you have access to this tool. If there is a domain specific question, you should use it. But all that said, that's only part of what would make an expert agent. It's a very important part, but not the whole picture. So right now we have an LLM that's a tool user and has an execution loop, and we've added in this domain specific knowledge. What is often the case is that there may be extra information that you want to add in. Typically, RAG databases are static. Okay. But let's say that you want to, we're actually building something like this at Engine Room where a individual creator is, we have a RAG database filled with like best practices for creating different types of content. But then we also toss in their individualized metrics via MCP. And the LLM knows that the user can ask questions about their own data, and they're only allowed to ask questions about their own data. And so now you've added in this extra, not domain specific, like it's not general best practices, it's very specific information. So that's also tends to be an important part. I wouldn't call it a requirement, but part of a domain expertise may be specific domain info, right? Data. And then finally, there tends to need to be some kind of working memory. And that working memory can be provided by something like mem0. And what's really interesting is there are oftentimes multiple levels of working memory. And I have something written down about that, which was very helpful. Let's
you didn't
see.
say we were doing preparation for the podcast
I
today.
did preparation. Okay. So there's working memory, which is short term. There's episodic memory, which is kind of like the, in this chat session with this user, this is what happened. Then there is facts and knowledge and semantic memory, stuff that facts and knowledge that was generated during a given chat. Part of the idea behind these expert agents is they remember. And so if you go back to the agent and you say, remember we were talking about this, and the agent's like, yeah, I do remember that. And you say, let's continue on with that conversation. What's interesting is this exact stuff is currently being built into Claude Desktop. Well, actually, ChatGPT has it explicitly in there now because the ChatGPT remembers what you've talked about now. And
Yeah,
that's
mostly
this.
some of the times, caveat supply. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the as always, your mileage may vary.
yeah. Don't let your kids play with
Right.
your chat GPT because now you got mixed memories. It gets
Right.
messy fast.
This ends up like Netflix, where your kids
Yeah.
use your profile because you're logged in under your profile, and next thing you know, you go look for your show recommendations, and it's like Bluey if your kids are
Yeah.
younger.
My
I
kids
mean,
don't watch much TV, so my Netflix is not a problem. But if you look in my Kindle, it is effed. It is bad in
absolutely
there.
right.
I
My
never
wife,
find anything I want.
my wife likes a particular type of novel. And when I go look at Kindle, oftentimes it's like, because of your past reading history, would you like to listen to read this? And it's like, absolutely not. Let's go to the hardcore sci-fi and dark fantasy. Thank you. Which is not what my
I
wife
take it that is
reads.
not her genre.
No, not at all. So you got a semantic memory, then you've got like procedural memory, which is these are the steps we followed in order to get here. And there's a few others, there's meta memory and other things like that. But there's a memory component to this thing. That is, somewhat fulfilled by tools like MemZero. For a RAG database, go stand up RAGflow. Though I will say I did stand up RAGflow recently and I've been working with it and I had to go edit a Java heap setting
Ooh.
because it has Elasticsearch built in and I felt very dirty.
Yeah.
Very dirty after I
I don't
was
think
like,
I've done memory configuration since the aughts.
yeah, I know that it was just like, oh, I can't believe I have to do this. But the Java heap setting was 8 gigs, and I had been allowing all Docker containers to use at most 6 gigs. And so every time this thing would spin up, you'd make one question and it would just greedily grab every ounce of memory and crash. So that's why I had
Yeah.
to like,
And I hope you're not running more than 4 or 5 containers on your box because
oh yeah, no, it's actually on a total side note. I only use Apple like for development. You use MacBooks, I use MacBooks or Macintoshes in general. And I'm always so frustrated because in order to go to anything above the base memory and anything above the base hard drive storage, it's $1,000. And I like dream every once in a while about, God, what would it be like to have 2 terabytes of disk space and
admit you went and configured that and you know exactly what it takes to have that. It's just like,
32
yeah, that's not
gigs
happening.
of RAM. Oh my God, that would be incredible.
You'd
And
be
then,
like, if I didn't buy that, I could buy a computer every year. It's like, yeah, I'd
yes,
rather have one.
yes. Anyways, just totally bonkers.
It's
And,
insane.
in the meantime, on my half a terabyte hard drive with my 18 gigs of RAM, I am constantly having to obliterate Docker images.
Yeah, I went to a terabyte. My most recent purchase, the machine I'm talking to you through
Yeah.
right now, it's I can't live with this.
Yeah.
It's like,
At
here's
some
my
point,
$400.
mhm, at
Enjoy
some
it.
point I will like upgrade, but yeah, this was an upgrade over what I had previously, so it's crazy.
All right, so we
Anyways,
have
move.
models using tools that include RAGs and memories in a loop.
Hmm.
Tell me about the loop. That seems like an exciting part because I think I don't like the threads that you use with coding agents. I'm not sure I completely think of them as a loop, right? I think of them as a thread or a sequence where you clear the memory, you start, you ask some questions, and then you're done. Now, there may be some loop going on inside there
Right.
that is like iterate until this happens. So that's one interesting aspect of like, how do you know you're done? And we've talked about this before, but I kind of want two LLMs in that loop. I want the creator and I want the judge.
Okay, so I was actually going to get there, which is one of the hardest things about AI, these expert systems, these expert agents, and really any LLM in general, is they lie like a rug. And so we're building this one particular agent for Engine Room, and it's, dude, it will it will blow your mind. The very first query I fed into this thing, it told us something about particular creator that we did not know. And we've been working with this creator's data for like almost 2 years at this point. And I asked a question about RPM and it popped out with these are the best days to post and this is the time of year that that posting on these days is most effective. And I mean, I just sat there and I looked at it. I was like, is that right? And so I went and started trolling. I was like, this is right. We've never, and it wasn't just that, this particular creator, if you post on Sundays, every video on Sunday does better. Number one, from a RPM being revenue per milli or revenue per 1,000 views, right? And so Sundays, and then on top of it, Sundays in the fall. And
Okay, so you just have to wait a few months.
well, here's the thing. Working backwards from that answer, it's totally rational and something that we had been exposed to over and over again, just had never seen. And
Now, is
so
this a northern hemisphere fall, or does it work for both hemispheres? Because I'm now curious.
this this is Northern Hemisphere fall, but this would technically be worldwide because it has to do with holidays. So any Western holiday structure
Okay,
would work for this.
interesting.
So, but that's the first thing it popped out with. And then, I asked a few more questions, and then at some point, it just started making stuff up. I was like, oh, this is great. Like, this part was amazing, and this part is not. And one of the things we had discussed is effectively setting up an exact copy of the same agent, but changing the prompt to be your job is to make sure that this other person isn't lying, and offer it a reward, something like every lie that you catch you will get $100, because I don't know if you've paid much attention, but like apparently offering rewards makes these things work better. So
Yeah,
it's
I read that in the past, but I still wonder if you have one agent, there's no feedback mechanism, right? It will just do its own thing until it reaches some conclusion that it thinks is good. Whereas if you have two, you do have a chance of actually something kind of giving it the process with which to evaluate. With one agent, even if you give it the process, you could be like, well, I have two competing interests, complete this or complete it with the instructions. So I
Mhm.
could complete it without exactly the instructions, and at some point those two are like
Mhm.
the agent's gonna figure out which way it goes. But if you have
Mhm.
two, they're kind of more single-minded each, but then together
Right.
they may be able to
And there's your loop.
get to something.
There's your
Yeah,
loop.
that's is that a loop or is that like a thread, like in a boxer type configuration?
I, I, I mean, I'm working off the basic assumption that user interaction is part of the loop. And it becomes pretty clear cut. If the user interaction is part of the loop, then the user starts the loop. It goes to the initial agent. The initial agent gives some answer. That answer is then fed to the judge or the adversarial agent. That adversarial agent will go do its thing. Now there's one of two results here. Either one result is it catches a lie and does something with it. That something might be completely excise all of that information and then make a judgment on whether it can still give this answer. Or it could be to feed back to the original agent and say, this is a lie, you need to correct this.
I have
And
a
then,
definitional problem here, which
all
may
right, what's
be the word agent, right? Because when I think agent is here's your job, you go do it, you finish it, come back to me when you're done, you act on my behalf. But
mm-hmm,
if I'm there like answering yes no questions all the time or even giving a direction, that feels more like sidekick, right? I have an intern that's going to do stuff. I'm going to supervise until we are done, as opposed to the agent feels like it should, in my head, have a lot more independence in achieving the task. And it should be a lot better than just suggesting little tiny steps. There's an autonomy that comes with an agent. Autonomy, that's the right word I'm looking for.
yeah, I don't, I don't know that that specific type of autonomy is necessary for the definition of an agent as it is used currently, because For instance, if you had, let's say that you had an agent that was in your house, right? This is fully fabricated, but you've got some agent that runs in your house, right? And that agent,
You mean like my butler?
exactly, yeah. And so you can message your agent and be like, I need you to start the coffee maker. Everything's already in the coffee, right? Maybe it's ready to go, but you just want it to hit the button. That's agentic. That's an agent. It has taken an action on your behalf that has modified something in the real world or in the thing that you're working in. And that's an agent.
You see, for me, that an agent is able to take new information, evaluate it, make a decision that doesn't necessarily involve me, right? So if I told my agent go do my dry cleaning, it does not come back and ask, so what about the socks? It's already made an assumption that my socks go in the washer and doesn't need to go get dry cleaned, and it can figure it out, and the level of risk on being wrong on that is low, and just goes ahead and does it.
Well, what if that's,
Uh,
but I mean, what if that's part of the prompt, right? You've got this agent and you've already told it in advance, all of these types of clothes go to the dry cleaner and all the socks get put into the washer and then they disappear in the dryer.
is it that the agent is autonomy? Does autonomy mean that you have to go beyond what was prescribed, but you have to utilize context to make decisions when the prompt doesn't exactly fit? And you should be able to do that on your own. I think that's the key thing. Because, yeah, I get it. Like, you didn't have instructions on this, let me ask the user. Cool. But if you're my true agent, you're operating away from me. You may not be able to reach me. So do your best and figure it out. And again, this is not here or there, but I'm
Yeah.
curious as to when we refer these to agents, what are we implying that these things may do? So if I'm saying, hey, I'm using Claude Code to do coding, and I say, no, I'm doing agentic coding. For me, when you say agentic, it implies that there's some more level of autonomy that this thing can go and do bigger chunks on its own. Whereas if you call an agent what we're currently using, I'd be like, okay, so what's the difference or what's the point?
Have you used JUULs from Google?
I have not.
Okay. JUULs fits your definition for an agent. So the concept behind JUULs, and I've used it a few, it's JULES for what it's worth, is this. You give it access to your GitHub. You give it an
Read only
instruction.
or just read write?
What say what now?
Read
You can
write
do
or
it.
just
I mean, it needs read write because it has to push branches.
YOLO? Okay, I could be okay to
No,
push
no,
a
but hear me
branch.
out. It very explicitly will only push a branch. Like it'll create a branch. Okay. And you hand it a task. And right now they're like, and please make sure the task is simple. But you say, so for instance, in some of the stuff that we're doing, I had a long time ago put a hard limit on the number of number of videos that I would pull back from YouTube. And in the back of my mind has been, I need to go, I need to go fix that, right? Because we're only pulling 200. If somebody has like 600 or over 1,000, which few of our creators do, I need to be able to get all those because you're skewing the data set. And to make it worse, it's not like it pulls the most recent 200, it just pulls 200 at somewhat random. And so I went to Jules and I gave it access to the repo and I said, hey, go fix this. And while you're at it, I want you to turn all of the SQL queries into upserts as opposed to straight inserts because it was getting expensive to maintain all of that database. And it did it. And I got
Did
a
that feel narrow
notification.
though? Because there's one file it probably went into and found the area of code. So
No,
you used
no.
English to find code that it did this in, and
This literally went through about 5 different files. It built a context around what it was working on. It was contained, like I tend to contain my projects in smaller repos, which is infuriating at times, but also kind of necessary. So this is in our collector code base. Our collector code base is not huge, but it's not simple by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably one of our most complex code bases. And it had access to it. And so it actually kept a log of the things it did, the stuff it looked at, and eventually it came back and said, hey, I got a notification later. It was like, I'm done. Do you want to come look at this? And I took a look at it. I was like, well, this looks reasonable. And I gave it the thumbs up, and it cut a branch. It was already on a branch and pushed it and set up a PR.
And how were
It
you able to verify that this was not hallucinating in some chunks? I have a real trouble when giving it like a big task, then go. It's like reviewing someone else's PR. If you didn't leave any context, if I don't know what the heck you're doing, it's
Mhm.
hard, right? So, like when I write it, I might write it commit by commit and being like, okay, well, first I'm gonna like abstract this function over here, then I'm gonna call this function over there, then I'm gonna flesh that function in there, then I'm gonna
Mhm.
display the results so I can see it. So if you're reading it, there's a story, there's like a path. But if you just
Right.
dump that whole thing on me,
Mhm.
let's
You're
just say
moving
I've
the
been bitten a few
goalpost,
times where
Thanos. You keep moving the goalpost, damn it. First it had to be autonomous, but now you're
well,
like, but
yeah,
also it has to be right. And
it's interesting because those two are related in a way. Because if you want to see it, understand it in small steps, you can trace it and give it the instructions like chunk by chunk. Or if you let it go in and be autonomous and do this in one big gigantic step, you could do that, but then you need some traceability and be like, okay, well, walk me through how you developed this. Tell me like how chunk by chunk how this works. What was your thought process of doing it?
I think Jules
If you do
keeps
none
that.
of these things, then I just have a big piece of code that I don't quite understand.
Let's see, JULs, JUULs. I'm actually going in to look at what it did.
Is this going to be a live demo? I think our audio only
Yeah, no,
audience is going to
I
love this
don't
part.
know that a live demo is the thing we want to do. But let's
We
see.
could read
Yeah.
out the code; it'd be fine.
And no, I'm not going to read out the code. Yeah, it kept a log in and put it into the PR
That's
for
nice.
yeah. So it's I mean, look, it's got oh, I apologize. It pushed the branch. It did not issue the PR.
Okay, that's
But still, I mean,
Butler, bad Butler. Like
I,
if you do it, might
you're
as well
over
like
here
see it to the
going.
end.
You're over here going. I don't know. I don't want to have right. You're just freaking moving the goalposts all the time, Thana's like. Pretty soon you're gonna be like, and it needs to protect world peace.
Is this an issue of trust where
It is.
with a child, you give them more and more responsibilities, and as they do
Yeah.
better and better, you let them run more and more with it. But with the AI, it's not the same because you give more responsibilities and they F it up immediately. So I,
But
I don't think I've built that trust. I've built the trust enough that if I oversee you step by step of the way, we will get along together and we will write code faster. But I don't have the trust yet to say, all right, kid, it's up to you now. Go.
yeah, but very like if you're gonna start building that trust with a child, you don't hand the child a toolbox and say, go fix the car. You say, I want you to take this screwdriver and I want you to tighten the screws on that door over there on that particular hinge. That's very simple and straightforward. And that's what you're supposed to be doing with JUULs at the moment. This is not I'm setting you loose to go do whatever you want. This is,
Yeah.
I have a very discrete bug I would like for you to fix. Like that's how they bill it specifically is there are bugs, they're small bugs. These are not, you're not refactoring the entire code base.
Yeah.
You're
That's
just
for me, that's
fixing
a
some
teenage
bugs.
intern, not an agent. I
Yeah.
don't know. I ascribe in my head a lot more competency and autonomy to the agent.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the thing that you're asking for is like, God, that'd be amazing. A fully autonomous senior engineer that's fast. Like maybe it needs very explicit requirements, but wow,
You had
dude,
to throw
that'd
the
be
word in fully autonomous in there because that's a whole
I don't
different
I
can of
mean,
worms, right? Because now you need context you don't have. I would settle for something that may be an adversarial, like two models that are somewhat adversarial that can code something more competently than me and machine can, and that's the next sort of step of the evolution.
right,
I
but
think
the
I'd
I
be okay
guess
with that being the next step.
another hair to split here is that the two models can be inside the same agent. Like the agent is not constrained to only having one model.
Sure. It didn't mean two models in the sense of you have two different models. I meant there's two sets of instructions, and the
Yeah,
loop says, you do this, you evaluate this, you do this, you evaluate this.
yeah.
And I guess it could be interesting if they're completely different LLMs because they might bring different skills to the table in
And
some ways.
actually, that is like, I know that Claude 4 is really, really good at coding, but Gemini is better in some aspects. And there is an interesting question to ask, which is, yeah, well, if you do use the adversarial model as a different model, what happens? Because maybe you get better results. I don't know.
I feel we
And
should be able to code this in an afternoon.
do what now?
We should be able to code this in an afternoon. You basically hook up the API for this and that, and you throw a prompt, and you just give it the info and
Yeah.
go
And you
back
know
and
what?
forth.
So, and to that point, what's really interesting about these expert agents is all the tech is there. All the tech is there. If you want to stand one up in a short period of time, you actually can. And you can do it with the majority of the stuff being off the shelf, right? Either go find the GitHub repos you want, and what is there is sufficient to start. What I have found as I have been, working on these and using these is that the knowledge base is perhaps the most important and hardest part to get together. And that leads me to believe that there may be a part of this that is kind of overlooked, which is you probably want a knowledge base that can grow. And that knowledge base needs to grow autonomously, but it still needs to adhere to the overall direction of the knowledge base. And so I've not seen this mentioned anywhere, but you could, like, number one, scraping and looking at things is pretty commonplace. So, maybe you should have a sub agent in the data collector that's going to fill the RAG database that goes out, finds things, and then you have an adversarial one that references the existing RAG database and determines if what you're about to put in is in line with that. So,
You may have to have, like you're saying, multiple, not necessarily always adversarial, like the judge and the
right.
doer, but for
But multiple
example, the
agents.
memory creator may have a very different set of instructions. I don't know if you've tried this, but whenever I use like a context file and I ask the agent to update the context file,
Right.
it tends to not really remember things in a good way, right? You described like working memory, episodic
Right.
procedural memory, and so on.
Right.
It tends to just dump shit in a file, and it's like, okay, that's
Right.
like a lot of details we don't need anymore.
Yeah.
That's like the high level thing that we need elaboration on.
Yeah.
And it's super like disorganized and duplicative. So I think the way that human brains work, which I don't think we kind of fully understand, we probably know enough about it is super interesting in how we remember things over time and how we consolidate memories and how we like restore things by re-remembering them and so on. So it's curious if you can solve it or get it closer to a solution by throwing another agent in the pile in your loop
Right.
that deals with the memory as opposed to just having it being part of the RAG system.
Yeah. I think if you're going to go build an expert agent of some kind, you quickly arrive at a place where it is a collection of other agents, and each agent has a job, and those agents go about and do their job. And the entire point of all of these agents working together or working against each other, even, is that the answers that come out of the expert agent are truthful and valid to the domain.
I wonder how long it is until they start bribing each other.
I feel like that is an entirely different podcast because it's going to happen.
I know you said that this thing doesn't pass my type checks, but the user wants a result, and I don't think we should do this, so I will give you $100 if you say this is good.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah. No, I am I've already seen that behavior in sorry, in my coding agents, where, because a coding agent is a true agent, right? There's a loop. and it just goes through the loop until it finds the answer. But as the loop goes on, it ends up getting irritated. I don't know, man, but the further the
Yeah, I
loop
mean, I
goes,
guess the point
yeah,
is if you had concrete and explicit instructions to maintain your side of the bargain, that may be harder than having a multi-goal optimization where a single LLM has the context to do a lot more stuff. So it
here's
has
an
to
interesting.
balance this versus that.
Mhm,
Whereas if you do it adversarially, well, you only have to insist on this.
mhm.
Now the other person is going to insist on that, but can you change its mind or its mind in quotes?
Yeah. An
Now I
interesting
really
thought
want to spin
here,
one of these up.
and we can probably wrap up after this, is when we talk about the loop, is the assumption as part of the loop that you reset the context window each iteration of the loop.
I don't think so.
Okay.
My guess is that a loop has a goal at which point you exit the loop, and that's the point where you clear context.
Yeah. Well,
But
the
that
way
said, like we
coding,
know they do like context compressions and so on. So I'd be very curious to see what that actually looks like. Is it just another prompt that says, read the conversation so far, summarize it, and then you start a new thread that just has that inside it, or is it something more
yeah,
sophisticated than that?
yeah, I don't know. Anyways, this is a really fascinating area of things of exploration I've been looking at. I think there's a lot of very real power here. I have a lot of other big brain ideas about, you know, how and where the internet will go and how these things fit into that. But that's not for us to talk about right now because that will take a long time and you will get frustrated because it is not practical.
Yeah, and I'm a little skeptical on this whole agent thing, but
Yeah.
I'm more so in trying to discover where this is going to go because I think I'm also positive, and right, I don't think I see this as the next sort of NFT or other fad. I think this is real and here to stay, and as we learn how to use it, it's only going to get better because there's a lot of smart people having at it, and the thing itself has some kind of smarts that we can then leverage, and it's going to be an interesting loop. But I'm more curious as to how we get there. What is the path between A and B?
Yeah.
And what does that future look like? Because it's super exciting. I keep seeing like all the skeptics out there saying this is never going to work, and I'm kind of with you if that vibe coding is never going to work. But there's a lot of really good stuff here that if you're ignoring, you're missing out. That's not to say that the humans are useless and this thing's going to be coding by itself like tomorrow. But we've seen too many good results to be like, just ignore this. This is nothing
Yeah,
exciting here.
the you and I, and I think we agree on this. We have passed some inflection point, and software engineering is never going to be the same. And there's a lot of people that are afraid of that, and as a result, they like push back on it. They're like, "No, this will never work." And the real critical error that a lot of these folks make is that they tried it 4 months ago, and it didn't work and they're like, it'll never work. It's like, whoa, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, time out. Like, we've progressed multiple generations of models now, friend. Maybe you should
Not
try
only
it.
that, but I think we also know how to use them better, and we know what
Yeah,
techniques work and what techniques don't. So
yeah,
I think there's a lot more to it than that.
absolutely.
And it's also, I think, a lot of times when you see this is not going to work, they pick a very narrow thing. And it's like, yeah, okay, that particular thing might actually never work for what you're trying to do, but it works over here. And then when that gets a little better or you add some more things to it, then that kind of works over there too.
Yeah,
It's easier trying to find a narrow thing and saying, well, this is not going to be able to do my large refactoring of this system. And it's like, yeah, that's possibly true, but
sure,
you
but
could use it this way and that way, and you could do chunk by chunk, and then that is going to work, or you
yeah,
can use that system over there. So
always
super
intriguing.
more fun times ahead.
All right, my friend. Anything else for today?
No, I'm looking forward to recording next week from yet another different Starlink location.
Oh, where will next week? Because right now you're in the land of the gods.
Right now, I'm in the general vicinity of Athens, Greece.
So
It's
jealous.
let's see, 31 Celsius outside right now. Actually, I guess it
Oh
is
my
inside
God,
that
are you
much as well.
serious?
Yeah, but it's
What is that?
dry-ish.
What is that rank to in Fahrenheit? That's over 100 Fahrenheit, right?
I don't know if I meet Mr. Fahrenheit in a dark alley, it's not going to be good because
Well, I'm
he
gonna
had
look.
one thing to do is figure out the starting temperature to be correct and the ending
Oh,
temperature to be correct, and he messed up
yeah.
both of these. So it's
No, actually, that's not terrible. It's 87 Fahrenheit. We're there today with like 80% humidity. I went, I went on a run yesterday and about died. Okay, where next week? Where are you gonna be next week?
Next week's going to be in the island of Paros, where I'm going to be. I probably would have already done some kite surfing sessions in the morning before we talk.
Oh yeah.
So I'm
All
going to
right.
be in a very good mood.
Excellent. Excellent. All
Better
right.
than normal, which is also a very good mood.
Better. Are you going to be more willing to accept my definitions in that place?
Oh no, good mood was going to be more fun argumentative.
Okay. Oh, all right. All right. Yeah. You just
Yeah.
the
Let's pick
happier
the next
you
topic
are,
carefully.
the more combative you become, I think is what you're
Oh,
saying.
heck yeah.
All right. Humans of Earth, thank you for coming along on today's episode of Will AI Snap That? I am your host, Michael Rollins, joined as always by Thanos, he of the Snapdom. We will see you later.